So we're going to finish, basically we'll be in 2 Samuel 18, but I want to just touch in the last few verses of chapter 17 where we left off last week. You know, we had people vying for power to persuade Absalom of how to go after David. And between the two men that were trying to do that, once Absalom chose Hushai, the one who was David's friend and companion, as you will recall, David sent him there to intervene and basically God used that to give David time to get out and be able to position himself to defend himself. And so Ahithophel, who was the one whose advice was turned away, has gone out and put his house in order and hanged himself. So that is verse 23. So we'll pick up with verse 24. And Absalom made Amasa captain of the host instead of Joab. That would be kind of normal to do. Yes, Joab is a great commander, but he's also been loyal to David more or less over the years. And even if Joab is making a pretense of being upset at David, then he's still maybe not the one you want. He didn't feel like he could trust him at the time. Of course, we're going to see what happens. Fred?
Yeah, I'm just thinking here about Ahithophel, and what spiritual principle might have been missing here that prompted him to commit suicide. And this is a very serious blind spot he's got here. I think we could safely say, can we suppose what is missing in his life here?
Well, last week we talked about that he obviously had very shrewd political abilities. He seemed to have no spiritual depth at all. He had no spiritual insight, which is what his problem is. And so he's obviously disillusioned. He knows his future politically is sunk, and so he's got nothing left, apparently. He's not a spiritual man at all, so he's got nothing to live for, basically. That's what people like that do.
I think part of this was exactly what you said. He was doomed. And he knew that probably the easiest way out was to take his own life rather than having David come back and did what happened to Joab and the priest.
Yeah. So when people don't have a good, strong spiritual foundation, I mean, even Christians, young Christians, I mean, we've seen that recently. You know, they will end their life. You know, they get to a point of despair.
I was just going to say, how sad, because earlier, wasn't there references to him that people listened to his counsel, almost, like this is from God?
Yeah.
And yet when he sided with Absalom and just went down this slippery slope that just reached a point where, I'm doomed. Because if David wins, Absalom's not listening to my counsel, so he's probably going to lose. And when he loses, David's going to come back and take retribution on those who've sided against him, and I'm doomed.
And, almost like the Judas.
Well, don't forget, who was the one who advised Absalom to go into the concubines? So last week, remember, we had said that Ahithophel knew he had a small window to take David militarily. And he knew if they did not take that opportunity, there would be no way to beat David. So once Hushai, prevails, that opportunity is gone. So, as Pastor says, David comes back. If he comes back with any kind of power at all, how's Ahithophel going to answer David for going to persuading his son to go into his concubines? How's he going to live that down?
That's good.
Bob.
I think this is an example of what happens in our lives if we decide to go against what God wants for us, because David is kind of a picture of the Lord in this particular instance, and Ahithophel turned against him and decided to go his own way. And the Lord deals with us the same way today. If we decide we want to go our own way, we won't pay the price for it. And so the same thing happened to Ahithophel. Of course, knowing how David had done before, if I'd have been in the same position, I'm not sure I might have done the same thing, because one way or the other, I was going to die. Either at my own hand or David's.
Right.
What if it's hatred and bitterness for David, also the fact he wasn't able to be able to get any kind of vengeance against David? I wonder if that might have played a role too. Just blinded by it. Yeah. I mean,
Did you have any conclusions yourself?
He was passionate as others. We have thought.
Okay. Well, that's the assessment we have. Does that answer your question? Okay. Anybody else?
What you brought up about his Bathsheba, how you vengeance, hatred, how it can be a open door to ruin your life. You think that the other person's suffering more, but you hold on to non-forgiveness. You know how that can be used by the enemy to just destroy your life, and that's a picture of what happened here.
Mm-hmm. And as we go into chapter 18, especially the last half of the chapter, I'm amazed at the detail that's there relating to the events. It's almost like watching a suspenseful movie or something. Something bad's getting ready to happen. And it's just like stretched out in slow motion almost. And I was thinking about why is it done that way? Why is it written in this fashion? It's done with great skill. Of course, it's the Word of God. But it's done very purposefully, I believe, to get us to slow down and to consider not just the events that happened as though, they are just things that happen, but to try to get us to get into what the characters are dealing with, what they're struggling with. We'll see that later in chapter 18 with David, as he reacts to what happens in chapter 18. So let's move on and get into chapter 18, but I'm going to finish up here in chapter 17. So then David came to Mahanaim. Now I'm going to move through this fairly steadily. If anybody wants to make a comment or you've studied something out, just raise your hand. We'll catch it as you go. Don't be too polite, okay? Because I'm going to try to move along here. So Mahanaim is a place east of the Jordan River, just a little bit south-ish of where the Sea of Galilee is, but to the east, okay? And it's a very rocky, it's ravines and it's not exactly, it's not where the mountain is, Gilead. It's not quite that high up. Mount Gilead is to the north of that. That's where Absalom's getting ready to go to take the army to. Mount Gilead's about 8,000 feet high, but David is to the south of Mount Gilead and in this very wooded ravine type territory. it's perfect for him to hide out. And so he is getting in a defensive posture there. And here's the thing we have to remember. David is a very successful military strategist, and we'll see that as we read. But don't miss some of the detail that's here that illustrates that. Even the location of where he is very significant, and will eventually play into Absalom's defeat, because some of the principles of war you see being played out here, which is to try to break up the enemy, try to disperse them, try to get them so they can't communicate with each other. And this terrain is perfect for that. Also, don't forget that Absalom, we're going to see, has the huge army on his side. He has basically all of Israel, which is going to indicate to us, and it's going to be a part of our lesson today, is that just because you've got more numbers doesn't mean you're going to win. And we've seen that time and time again, that skillful use of your resources will trump a large amount of an enemy. Brandon, Pastor Brandon?
Gideon comes to my mind.
Yeah. Well, we've seen
it's not even a matter of the skill set. It's a matter of if God's in control, he's going to give victory.
That's right. That's right. But to the extent that, not against what you're saying, but God uses us in our own skill. He provides us with, he provided David obviously with the intelligence, the prowess to do this. And all this time that David had been running through, escaping prior to the time he came in Jerusalem, I mean, he had a bunch of hardened men with him, men who were used to living off the land. What does Absalom have? He's got first of all, what time has Absalom spent in war? None, as far as I know. And a lot of the Israel, they weren't running, they weren't hiding out. They've been basically city folks, the whole time. And so what you have here is it's almost like, excuse me for saying this, I don't want to offend anybody because I'm a country boy. I grew up in the country, and we were real proud about that. And we kind of thumbed our noses at mom called them city slickers, and we just felt sad for them. When push came to shove, they couldn't work, they didn't know how to do anything. They probably couldn't take care of themselves. If there is a good thing, I think it's a healthy thing to know you can live off the land if you need to. We might need to do that again going forward. I don't want to get off into anything inappropriate here, but I will say that there are very serious groups of people right now, a lot of them prior military, who are actively talking about if this government starts veering into socialism, they will defend the Constitution. And they will take out the grid, the electrical grid themselves, and how easily they can do that. And we'll all be living off the land when that happens. And it doesn't matter then what the numbers are. It's a matter of surviving. So being able to survive is a good skill set to have all the time, not just in biblical times. Okay? Any comments?
Where do we get our seed? No.
So here we go. So Absalom.
He's the most country. We're just gonna move to his house.
So wow, I got ponds and I got fish and I got my bow and arrow. Okay. And Absalom made Amasa captain of the host instead of Joab, which Amasa was a man's son, whose name was Ithra, an Israelite, that went into Abigail, the daughter of Nahash, sister to Zeruiah, Joab's mother. I'm not going to go into all that because there's too much territory to cover, but there's some significance there. So Israel and Absalom pitched in the land of Gilead. That's the mountain just north of where David and his men are. And it came to pass, when David was come to Mahanaim, that Shobai, the son of Nahash of Reba, of the children of Ammon, and Makir, the son of Amiel of Lodabar, and Barzillai, the Gileadite of Rogelim. Okay, now those three people are very significant. Every single one of them, in some way, was indebted to David. David had been kind to them or their people, particularly the Ammonites, because you'll recall that there was David had to go in and spank them real good because they weren't being nice to him as their father had been. The son who came into power had gone up against it, tried to go up against David, and David had to go and whip him into shape. Here's an indication that relationship is healthy at this time. And so they brought. So here's Brother Ed, Roberts, in the military and all that. He's involved, and so I know you hear a lot of things about how armies support themselves. Well, here's your logistics. I mean, your beans and bullets going here. This is the supply chain right here. In feeding this group of people, in this relatively small group of people in the mountains, in these hills and ravines and woods. They've got beds. Now these are probably just little roll up type things, but that would be nice to have when you're sleeping in the rocks. And basins and earthen vessels and wheat and barley and flour and parched corn. So now we're going to have some really good tortillas, and beans. Wow, we got some Mexican food going here. And lentils and parched pulse and honey and butter and sheep and cheese of kine, that's cows, for David and for the people that were with him to eat, for they said the people is hungry and weary and thirsty in the wilderness. So here's David's military supply chain. Okay? So he's doing pretty good. He can survive like this for a long time. I'm not so sure about Absalom and his many people. How's he going to support that many people out there? How are you going to supply that? Just asking. So chapter 18, and David numbered the people that were with him and set captains of thousands and captains of hundreds over them. So captains of thousands, that's a battalion, basically. And captains of hundred, that's your companies. Funny that we still structure our military just like this. We have Alpha, Bravo, Charlie batteries, and then we'll typically have another company that is the headquarters and brings in, the supply and does a lot of that management part. So David sent forth a third part of the people under the hand of Joab. So there's one company. Or it could be a battalion, I guess. And a third part under the hand of Abishai, the son of Zeruiah. That would be like a nephew. And Joab's brother. And a third part under the hand of Ittai, the Gittite. Now this is interesting because he's a... You know what his nationality is? Anybody? He's a Philistine. A Gittite is from Gath. And remember when David was hanging out there with a bunch of his men, living there for a long time? So this was the one who, first of all, Abishai, just so you know who he's dealing with. This is the Abishai that went with David when Saul was sleeping on the ground and said, "Hey, you got your chance, kill him now." This is the Abishai that helped David sneak into there to do that. Okay, and so these are significant men and trusted men. But the people answered, "Thou shalt..." Did I skip some? I guess I must have. Let's see. And the king said unto the people, "I will surely go forth with you myself also." So David's remembering what happened with Bathsheba. He didn't go out. There came a time when kings go forth to battle. David tarried still in Jerusalem. He's like, I don't want to repeat that mistake. But they resist this offer. But the people answered, "Thou shalt not go forth, for if we flee away, they will not care for us." In other words, if we run off into the woods, they're not going to come chasing us. We'll be all right. But if you do, neither if half of us die will they care for us. But now thou art worth 10,000 of us. Therefore now it is better that thou succor us out of the city. Basically, that you see us off and wish us well. And the king said unto them, well, he didn't say well, I'm putting that in there. What seemeth you best, I will do. So this is interesting because he's conceding to the people here, to the wish. I find that I really feel like David is still very emotionally distraught. I mean, this is his son that's trying to fight him. And I really think he's torn. I don't think he wants to go out and fight his son. So I think it's easier for him to say, okay, I'll stay back. Do you see how that could be? Any comments on that? I think that was actually a gracious thing for the people to do. I wonder if that was really their motivation. And the king stood by the gate side, and all the people came out by hundreds and by thousands. And the king commanded Joab and Abishai and Ittai, saying, deal gently for my sake with the young man, even with Absalom. And all the people heard. That's significant. All the people heard when the king gave all the captains charge concerning Absalom. Bring him back alive. And so the people went out into the field against Israel. Now notice, it says the people, and it says against Israel. That's a really strong indication that Israel in general had gone to follow Absalom. And the battle was in the wood of Ephraim, where the people of Israel were slain before the servants of David. And there was a great slaughter that day of 20,000 men. For the battle was there, scattered over the face of all the country. And the wood devoured more people that day than the sword devoured. So the terrain was taking its toll. And Absalom met the servants of David. And Absalom rode upon a mule. And I can just see this scene. You know, the low trees. And Absalom, mules are, some of them are kind of tall actually. But Absalom's got this big head of hair. And he sees him in there, and all of a sudden the chase is on. And here goes Absalom, and all of a sudden this branch, this big old forked branch, he just like scoops right into that thing, and the mule keeps going, and he's left dangling. And now his hair is all caught up in these briars, and he's fighting, trying to get out, and they're all surrounding him, and he's hanging there. Can you see that? And Absalom met the servants of David, and Absalom rode upon a mule, and the mule went under the thick boughs of a great oak, and his head caught hold of the oak, and he was taken up between the heaven and the earth, and the mule that was under him went away. And a certain man saw it and told Joab and said, behold, I saw Absalom hanged in an oak. And then Joab said unto the man that told him, and behold, thou sawest him, why didst thou not smite him there to get to the ground? I would have given thee 10 shekels of silver and a girdle. The man said unto Joab, though I should receive 1,000 shekels of silver in mine hand, yet would I not put forth mine hand against the king's son. For in our hearing the king charged thee and Abishai and Ittai, that's the 3 commanders, saying, beware that none touch the young man Absalom. Otherwise I should have wrought falsehood against mine own life. For there is no matter hid from the king, and thou thyself would have set thyself against me. It's like, what are you talking about? That'd be an unlawful thing to do. Then said Joab, so this tells you where Joab is on this now, in his relationship with David, and I think we're going to see going forward when David takes Joab out of power and puts this actually inferior commander, Amasa, in charge of the army. I think this is part of the reason right here. Then Joab, I may not tarry thus with thee. And he took the 3 darts in his hand and thrust them through the heart of Absalom, while he was yet alive in the midst of the oak. And 10 young men that bare Joab's armor compassed about and smote Absalom and slew him. And Joab blew the trumpet, and the people returned from pursuing after Israel, for Joab held back the people. Joab blew the trumpet, the people returned from pursuing Israel, for Joab held back the people. And they took Absalom and cast him into a great pit in the wood, and laid a very great heap of stones upon him. And all Israel, that's, remember, the ones who were following Absalom, fled every one to his tent. Now Absalom in his lifetime had taken and reared up for himself a pillar, which is in the king's dale. For he said, I have no son to keep my name in remembrance. And he called the pillar after his own name, and it is called unto this day Absalom's place. So Absalom, the only thing he had left to carry on his lineage was apparently a pillar he stuck up for himself before this event. So, any comments on the battle? Bob?
I'm not thinking it was in earlier in chapter 17, Absalom put somebody in charge versus Joab. So that leads you to believe that Joab was at least present at that time there with Absalom. And then in the next chapter you see he's with David. So David puts him in charge of going out to battle and gave him a direct order, not to harm Absalom. Mm-hmm. So it makes me wonder where did Joab's loyalty really lie? I think it's more with himself than anybody else.
Yeah, I think you're exactly right. Absalom didn't trust him. David didn't. Well, David put him to work, but he was only one of three, and we know what happened.
I'll explain why he killed Absalom. It was because he's very embarrassed in not replacing him with Amasa. He was a loose cannon anyway. I mean, he killed. Who was that? He killed Abner. He knew what she'd done that either. David remembers that too when he got his vengeance against Joab.
I want you to consider something. I was thinking about this week. There's a lot of things that motivate men to do what they do. But even the worst villain is right in his own eyes. You can take pretty much any movie you want to, and the villain, whoever that is, whatever they're doing, they have justification for it. Joab, and I think even to the same extent Absalom, and I want you to consider this, I think both of them felt that David had failed. And both of them felt they could do the job better. Whatever job needed to be done as it related to military, Joab thought he could. He knew the right thing to do, to include killing Absalom, who was the enemy of David. I think we're going to see that coming in when we see David's reaction, which I hope we get to this morning, because it's very interesting. And especially as you move into chapter 19, David's reaction to this, well, we won't get to that part. That'll be next week probably, Lord's willing. But Joab has to come in and basically shake David and say, wait a minute, we just won a battle for you, and you're acting like we were the enemy. You're more sad about the enemy losing than, and your people now are in disarray. They don't even know how to act right now because of how you're acting. So Joab has this sort of, I'll call it righteous indignation. It may be misplaced, but I think he's right in his own eyes. And I think the same thing was true for Absalom. I think Absalom felt that his father was not ruling the kingdom the way a king should. Absalom, though, had grandiose ideas about how a king should be, had no field experience at all, had no real wisdom, didn't even know how to handle situations. But it's like these young kids, just like I was when I was a kid. I thought I knew better than the adults, right? I think I can do it better than they are. There's this tendency when we're young to be that way. And then we learn when we get older, well, that was a little bit of youthful ignorance going on there. So be careful, youngins. You will see.
You have to remember, too, that Joab had history with David in that Joab was the one that put Uriah out in front. And he had that background thinking, well, David has sinned, David has committed.
Right.
And So that background is there, and it's tracing all through his life. And Joab's thinking, well, I'm better than he is.
Right. And I think Absalom has that same mindset. The point is, be careful when you think the person in charge, the one who is in God's sitting in the office, we'll just call it that, no matter what the position of authority is. Be careful how you handle that. It's good to use your influence properly, but it's wrong to try to usurp the power. Because almost every case I pretty much see in the Bible, God, it just doesn't go well.
Anytime you set yourself against God's man, isn't it interesting how David handled Saul comparatively?
Yes.
I mean, he had already been anointed. He knew he was
Right.
going to be the next king. And in man's eyes, in every way, shape, and form, he had the right to take out what Saul was doing because he had set his hand against God.
That's right.
David, he's made some mistakes, but clearly he's still God's man.
Right.
Absalom, as David's son, he's still in a position. There's probably a lot of things going into play there, as his father, but he still set his hand against him. And isn't it interesting, as we read there in verse 8, this battle was the Lord's from the get-go.
That's right.
It didn't matter where it took place. It didn't matter what advantages took place. The wood devoured more of the men than what the
That's right.
battle,
That's right.
that took place.
That's right.
That's God's hand in it, and that's that thing. We have to be careful not to set our hand against anything that God has, regardless of whether we agree or disagree, regardless of the time frame happening as quick as we want it to, or as long as it needs to happen.
That's right.
Sometimes, hey, God's in control of the battle. We just need to step back, trust, wait, be patient. That's hard for me to do.
We need to let God handle his business.
Well, this is the thing that I want us to see here, is if I have anything to really point out here, is that just notice how David is one who is willing to let God have his way in how, whether he's punished, whether he's chastised, whether somebody else gets the power. In a sense, he's playing it pretty much right. Now, I still think he's soft, and I think he's doing that because he feels guilty, and he doesn't seem to have the discipline to handle his own son properly in a number of ways. And this is where Joab has had about it up to here with David on that point. Bob?
Two things. When you talk about fighting, the battle of the Lord, I think about all that boy Jehoshaphat. He didn't really have to raise his hand. The Lord took care of the battle. But in David here, don't you think that somewhere maybe in the back of his mind constantly was the thing that Nathan told him about his sons, about his family?
Oh, yeah.
And every time he would do something, that had to come to his mind.
Yeah, I think you're right.
Even in handling his sons, and maybe he was a little soft on it, but because he knew what their eventual end was going to be. I mean, Nathan made that clear. And so, that had to be in his mind whenever he done something that was concerning his sons. It had to be in his mind.
Right.
Affected.
Yeah. Okay. So let's talk about that for a minute. And Fred, you got a point too. I think, right? So how do you? You're exactly right. David knows that chastisement was coming his way, and he's not going to get in front of that train. Okay, he's going to let it play out like it's going to. And in his own mind, I really think that he understands why Absalom has come up against him, because he understands that he failed and Absalom has a point. And that's why he doesn't want to fight him. That's why he leaves the town. That's why he doesn't even want to go out to fight him. He takes the easy way out, which I understand that. Because he doesn't deserve to be where he is, and I think he knows that. And yet, he's still the king. And he still has to do what a king is supposed to do. He's still responsible. And I think this is the very thing he's struggling with. Is, look, there are times when you're a dad and you fail and you don't feel like you deserve to be a dad. But you still have to show up. There's going to be times where you just feel like running, hiding. But you can't. You still have to do the right thing. You have to stand in the place and do the right thing even though you don't feel like you deserve to be there. And this is true for any leader, in any position. There are times when we fail and we're like, I don't even deserve to be here. But that's not, we don't have the right to run. We have to stay in the place and do what's got to get done.
It's almost like he preferred his family in certain areas above all. He did what was right in other areas, like the man who came with the crown who had taken Saul's life. He was immediately executed. And David did that to many, and eventually even his counsel to Absalom, and taking the life of Joab as well. But when it came to his family, that's where, and we see at the very beginning when his son Amnon took Tamar, and he had a wrong relationship. Well, that, according to the law, there may have been a marriage, but according to Leviticus, David should have forced them to get married. So he didn't do right in that area. So when it pertained to his family, he was not as strong and as quick to action in areas as he was about others. Of course, Joab's a question to me personally, because from the very beginning, why on earth, I asked myself this question, did both God and David allow Joab to continue after he killed Abner? He went against the direct command and basically the leadership of David in the most powerful way that he could. Even though David looked at it as if, he slew his brother, and this is kind of a revenge act, and things like this. But still, David sent him away in peace. Mm-hmm. And that situation wasn't dealt with.
General principle here, then we'll come to Fred's comment. The most dangerous person in your organization, business-wise, even in a church, is the gifted man who you cannot afford to fire or let go because he's so invaluable that bucks your authority. Fred?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, to piggyback on Brandon's comment here, thinking about when David was in a crisis for years, having to hide from Saul just to protect his life. You see the integrity of David in crisis there. And if it's a roughly fair parallel with Ahithophel, you've got one vignette of him. He is a counselor. He gives apparently good wisdom. But when he's in crisis himself, then you really see his lack of spirituality and integrity to himself even. And so a real takeaway principle for me here today is that you don't really know a man till you see him functioning in crisis. Mm-hmm. Then what he is, he really is in crisis.
Mm-hmm. Here's a question. If Absalom had been taken alive, what would David have done?
Well, we know what David, we know his character. We know we can only speculate, of course.
I know.
Nothing.
But that's probably right.
It could have been what exactly what happened when the first time when he took the life of Amnon. And that is, he departed. He could have basically, what is the exile?
Kind of exiled.
Banished him.
Banished him to another place. But still, but it is interesting. The righteous man falls 7 times and gets up again. And what happens, all of us have within our hearts the desire that Christians be perfect because they've got the Lord. But we're not. What happens when we do fall? I think that Satan, and we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against principalities, powers. And what Satan wants us to stay down. That's why you minister in prison. Because when individuals get saved, you believe no matter what they've done, God can still use them, amen? And so our hope is in the Lord that He'll use everybody. What happens when it's us and we fall and we have a good knowledge of the Word of God, it's really tough sometimes to get back up when we fail. And then, even as Joab may have not, because he had the death sentence for Uriah, from that point on, probably never respected David as king.
Right.
And number two, the respect was lost even in this area as far as Absalom was concerned. Him fleeing and David not going after him, so you have taken the life of a man. But the thing about it is, the challenge to each one of us is, at times when we do fail, and I'm not talking about disqualification, especially those in the ministry, disqualification, but that you get back up and realize the battle is the Lord's, and we've got to get up no matter what has been done and serve the Lord in some capacity. Because that's what God has called us to do from the very beginning, to glorify Him through our service.
Mm-hmm. One other point came to mind while we were talking is David does not probably have the ability to carry out justice as it relates to his son. And yet we know that God was willing to have his son to die when he had done no wrong. He was willing to carry out justice. There's a sense in which justice is so pure in its carrying out that it seems merciless, and that's such a huge paradox that God would do this for us. He would do this for the sinner, us, and give up His own Son to do so. Now we know that Jesus is going to come back, and He gets him back, so it's all good, right? But it's the fact that He's even willing to do that, to sacrifice His Son. I mean, I think we ought to be. Don't you think sometimes we take that for granted, that God would do that? Well, of course He would do that because He loves us, right? But justice sometimes is so required that you have to carry it out. It's got to be carried out.
Amen.
And so God does it. He makes the decision to carry out justice. David can't do it on Absalom. He just can't. He's just like something there. He can't do it. God is able to do that because He's perfectly just. There's a distinction, very clear distinction between David and God in that regard, for what it's worth.
Yeah, I thought about Brother Bob's comment. It almost seems like David is, Nathan told him that the sword not depart from your house. And it's almost like he's just bent on not being that sword. I'm not, the Lord bring the sword, but I'm not going to be the sword that's going to be brought against my son, against my children. Of course, the Lord does have to do the justice because David's not going to do it. But and then I thought about Brandon's comment, and I agree with that. It's actually your comment too. I think what made Joab even worse is when you've got power, when you're controlling the army. It's a distinction. David had the same power over the army, and that's what makes Saul so afraid. It's because because he thought he was going to turn the army against him. And anytime you've got the army, you've got the power. And Joab, you put somebody in a position like that, it's easy to start thinking, well, I've got the power, and so therefore I can do a better job. And so, I mean, look at the devil. I mean, you can't help but believe that even from the beginning. Yes. I've got all this, I've got all that. Right. I control. He's clearly had sway with a third of the angels. I can do just as well as God. I mean, from the beginning, that was the first
exactly.
Sin.
Yeah. So let's leave it at that for today. Let's consider, just because we think we know better, and especially when we think we know better, tread carefully.
Power corrupts.
Just to tag on to what I said, maybe sometimes when we as Christians fail, one reason that it's so hard to get up is, unfortunately, a lot of times brothers and sisters in Christ are so quick to jump on that.
Right.
Instead of trying to encourage to lift you up,
That's right.
they're there to try to put you on the neck, so to speak. And I often heard it said, Christians are the only ones in life who kill the wounded. Mm-hmm. And so, that should behoove us that when we see somebody does that, is to pray for them, try to lift them up and help them, because they're already fighting, because they know they failed. And Satan's really after them, and so they need our help, our prayers, and our uplifting, at a time like that. And, if you think about it, maybe God allowed us to see that fallen brother for the specific purpose of being his helper.
That's good.
Maybe that's why he allowed us to see it. God is sovereign in everything he does. Maybe he allowed us to see this thing so that we could be a helper instead of being critical and so forth.
So that's a whole other topic we don't have time to go into today, but it's worth considering. Is when we see somebody failing, there's a part of us that wants to say, come on, buddy, get your act straight, and we want to be firm with them, and they do need that, but they also need words that are building, not critical words, not words that tear down, but words that build up. So as God was willing to sacrifice his own son and love, we should be willing to sacrifice something of ourselves and use a building up process and invest ourselves in some way to help bring that person up, which is an act of justice and righteousness. Does that make sense?
Well, it's in Mary, as far as David was concerned, God said, you're going to be judged. You're not going to die. You should die. You should be stoned. And yet he let him live. But you're going to have to pay a great price. That's because of the holiness of God. And I think that probably this is the apex of David's suffering when his own son wanted him dead. Mm-hmm. And he was absolutely going to basically show the greatest disrespect and dishonor that any son could show to his father. And what one of us could ever imagine, us raising a son, that son hating us and wanting us dead.
Amen. Hey, forgive me. I want to tell you just a 1-minute story. I just heard this yesterday. It's a man who's relating this event. There was a thing on the wall that he had. This man had come to work in his business, and the man was a drunk. And so he brought him in. He said, "Look, you're struggling with alcohol, aren't you?" And he admitted to it. He says, "So do you want to change?" He says, "Yeah, I do." He says, "All right, you're going to rehab." He's like, "Well, okay, I'll do it." He's no, you're going to rehab today. We're taking you. We're getting your clothes, and you are going. If you want this, you're going to rehab today. And this man took it upon himself to pay for the guy to go to rehab. This was an employee, okay? Pay for him to go to rehab. And when he came back home, he didn't get to go back home. He lived in an overhead place where the company was. And this man became a stellar employee, motivational speaker, but he had cancer prior to this, and he had only one leg or something like that. And so, he in this relapse, and he shortly after, a couple years later, died. But he died going out as a motivational speaker as opposed to this drunk, because this man took the time to call him out on his wrong, but also personally, it's like the Good Samaritan, invest in him and do the thing that it would take to bring this guy to a position where he could be successful. I think it's easy to call people out on their sin and their wrong, but do we invest in them with a building up process that can make it happen? Sacrifice part, I think sometimes missing.
And I think there's an example of that. Paul talks about church discipline, putting away the man who was having relations with his stepmom. You put him out, that's the justice. But then you see the next time, look, you need to help restore the man.
Right.
And he's contrite. I mean, you see 2 Corinthians 2, verse 6 and 7. It's sufficient to such a man as this punishment, which was inflicted of many, so that contrariwise you ought rather to forgive him and comfort him, lest such a one should be swallowed up with overmuch sorrow.
Yeah.
I think there is that balance. You have to have discipline and justice, but the ultimate goal is repentance and restoration.
And that's that. When does God's mercy override His judgment?
Mercy rejoices against judgment. I think they go hand in hand.
But when does it happen? When does it take place? How would that have played out in this scenario?
There's repentance.
Humility.
And that takes, humility. You can't have repentance without humility. I mean, humility leads to repentance.
Exactly, but you just think of it in relation to this situation. Reading in 1 Kings this last week, went through the entire book. A lot of it kind of stemmed from Wednesday night. We were going through the story of Elijah, but just even thinking King Rahab, outstanding king, right? No. God sent his prophet, tells him exactly what's going to happen as a result of his sin. Mm-hmm. What happened? He humbled himself before God. God was merciful to him. I mean, put that into perspective. Mm-hmm. How many times that took place on David's behalf, but how many times that took place in Jonah, man? He's going to Nineveh. Mm-hmm. What happened? He prophesied, here's what's going to take place. They humbled themselves. Mm-hmm. There was that repentant aspect, as you're stating.
That's good.
All right. Well, listen, we could go on and on, but some of you maybe have to go. Fred, you have something you want to say?
Yeah, just to say it another way, that humility and pride and failure goes all right together. It's God dealing with our pride. Yeah.
All right. Well, we're all work in progress. Jesus told us, He which hath begun a good work in you will perform it until the day of Jesus Christ, right? He's the one doing the work in us. So let's just submit. Let's be the submissive clay. All right? Brother Ed, what you got?
Psalm 580, He leadeth me. What I want to do is sing the first two stanzas and then sing the chorus, and then we'll sing the third and fourth stanzas and the chorus. So we'll sing the chorus twice. All four verses.
Thank you, gentlemen, for the good conversations. We appreciate it.
580.
He leadeth me, O blessed thought,